Welcome back to our community. Susie Thomas visiting with Julie Edwards, talking about pollinator gardens and how to get going on these. Something that you said during a break there, St. John's wort you mentioned as a good one to plant, echinacea you mentioned earlier. So many of these have good herbal qualities. Are there more that we can actually plant these things, grow them, attract bees, be doing our part as far as keeping the food supply up and running because we need bees for that, and also be able to grow our own herbal medicine type things in the backyard?
Yes, I'm glad you asked. There's a lot of plants that are pollinator friendly that are not native, and among that group is most of the herbs.
Okay.
Basil is a great one for attracting bees. Now, a lot of people who collect the basil leaves to make fantastic pesto will say, well, but I've been told to pinch the flower off the top before I plant, before I pick the leaves, otherwise the leaves will turn bitter. So what I usually tell people is, well, plant another basil that you let flower. Give one for the bee, one for you, one for the bees, kind of thing, and
Perfect.
let it flower if you're concerned. I planted a basil a few years ago. I think it was called a blue African basil or something. I wasn't all that enamored with the taste of the leaves, but oh my gosh, the bees were all over it like crazy. So if you've got an herbal plant that flowers, most of them are very, very pollinator friendly. Now, there is a native plant that was the 2019 Herb of the Year, and its common name, even though people say, well, that doesn't sound common, is Anise hyssop. And hyssop's mentioned in the Bible quite a bit. I don't know if it's the same, but and its Latin name is Augustaki funiculum. But anyway, we've got some growing over in the pollinator garden, and if you pull off a leaf and rub it, it smells very licoricey.
Oh.
And actually, there's an article in the current Herbal Quarterly, a 5-page article on the uses for Anise hyssop, like 4 or 5 recipes for it. And it is a wonderful bumblebee plant, so it happens to be a great herbal plant and a native plant. And it is a member of the mint family.
So the pollinator garden, it sounds like much of it is edible. Am I right?
I don't want to say much of it is edible.
Some
would be edible, but I wouldn't want to say much of it is. Some of it has herbal uses that aren't edible, and then some of it just has uses for the food for the bees.
And basically to be food for the bees.
Yes, and like I said, what we're doing, we're shooting, since we just started the pollinator garden, and gardening is trial and error, especially for me who's fairly new to this. But we're shooting for 70% native eventually in our pollinator garden. And but we will have we're going to have showy annuals up front, and that's to attract people to say, you can do this in your yard. You can still keep your I hate to say this, petunias and geraniums, because I do plant some of those at one of my own houses.
Sure.
But you can mix those in and still have some of these natives that are really bee friendly and really fun to watch. Lavenders, and I forgot to mention lavender is a great bumblebee plant also, and everybody loves lavender. Yeah,
everybody loves lavender.
Yeah, if you watch your lavender when it starts to bloom, it should be loaded with bees.
And the bees love it. Now, how does us planting these pollinator gardens help address the concern the farmers had about the collapsing of the bee colonies?
Well, I don't know that it directly does address that, and I just I got away from wanting to protect the honeybee. I thought my mission was in another direction. But a lot of the classes I go to, I do listen to people talk about the colony collapse disorder. And most of your bee experts at this point, your honeybee experts, will tell you that they view honeybees now as livestock or a commodity.
Really?
They are raised for commercial purposes. They are raised to pollinate. A gigantic portion of the commercial honeybee hives in this country are shipped all over the country to go to different areas to address different plants as they pollinate. For instance, when it's time for the almond trees to bloom in California, and there's millions of them. I don't want to say millions because I don't know, but a lot. a humongous, like 70 to 80%, if not more, of the commercial honeybee hives in this country are shipped out there by truck to pollinate those almond trees. And then they're shipped somewhere else to go somewhere else when there's another crop that needs them somewhere else in the United States. So these are hives that are really, I don't want to say livestock, but they are kind of livestock, and they are used for that kinds of purposes, commercial agriculture. So they are being watched very closely by those who make their living from them.
Yes.
That's not my job anymore.
No.
My job is to promote, and there's a lot of studies now being done on mason bees and some other pollinating bees, is that to promote them to pollinate also in those areas like the almond trees and that, just in case something would happen to the honeybees, which we know they are collapsing, and we also know that if some new disease comes up, the way those honeybees are kept in close quarters when they're transported, the potential for something to go like wildfire is there. So it's best that we keep promoting those bees that have been here a long time.
Mm-hmm. And don't be afraid of them. Don't kill the bees. We need the bees.
We need the bees. Don't kill the bees. Don't kill the bees.
Please don't kill the bees. You also are very active in collaborating with a number of garden clubs and addressing all kinds of issues. Organic, growing things organically, not using harmful pesticides. Educate me a little bit about some of this.
Well, it's not exactly where I landed. I landed more with the promotion of the pollinating gardens, but I'm, part of planting, one of the cardinal rules of planting pollinator gardens is don't use pesticides and herbicides and fungicides, because a lot of those can be damaging to bees. And even if they just weaken the bee, could be deadly. So it's, that's why I really want to promote those who are still growing food that way, because I think it's very, very important that happens. And I know before we went on today recording, I also talked about one of the dangers of our monocrop agriculture, and that means we've, what I call mega ag, these big agricultural businesses that own miles of land, and all they will plant on that is soybean, or all they'll plant on it is corn, or all, whatever.
Grow one thing.
Yeah, grow one thing. And what happens then is you need a lot more pesticides and a lot more herbicides to make those crops viable, because they are not existing as nature would have them. In nature, you've got insects that eat other insects. When you have a variety of plants, you've got a variety of insects, and you've got natural predators that kind of control each other or have the potential to control each other. And in monocropping agriculture, you don't. You've got the potential for a harmful insect that loves to eat soybean to just have its heyday. And so those types
and its natural enemy is nowhere to be found.
Nowhere to be found.
Okay.
So its unnatural enemy becomes chemical pesticides.
So translating that into what we can do in our little corner of the world, when I'm planting my garden, I want to find some things that are not going to be harmful. What do you use when you're, as far as pesticides or whatever, what do you use in the pollinator garden? What do you use, Julie?
We use nothing in the pollinator garden at this point.
Just let it go.
Yeah, we let it go. And there's no food crops in there at this point. I mean, there's some edible flowers, but there are no food crops.
But on my organic tomatoes, what can I do?
Well, I think that's a question better for Cindy Pettini maybe than I.
Well, we'll get her in here for sure.
She's probably better to tell you what's best to be used, because there are treatments. There are some natural products that can be used. There's probably some natural insects also that can be brought in. I'm not sure. That's an area I'm going to let another expert touch.
And I appreciate that. And in your growing, in your learning all of this, what surprised you the most that you've been learning all this new information?
Oh, gosh, what surprised me the most? I guess how quickly the pollinators came when we planted the garden. We had lots of monarch butterfly eggs already the first year on our milkweed, lots of bees. And in my one bee class that I took, we had to capture, photograph, and study some bees. And I guess the other thing that's just so amazing is if you get the chance to look through even just a jeweler's eye or a microscope at a bee that's covered in pollen, It's just an amazing thing. And bees have all sorts of different ways of collecting pollen, like honeybees and bumblebees have what they call a corbicula, which is a kind of a scoop in their back leg, and they pack the pollen in there. And so when you see those bees on your plant, they'll have like yellow cuffs on their back legs. They look like yellow cuffs. Some, depending upon the species, will collect pollen on their bellies. I was out, was out collecting some pollinators off my crabapple tree the other day, and I caught a bee which I've got to identify yet, which was had the belly hairs to collect the pollen. And she was so covered with pollen on her belly. I bet it was an eighth of an inch deep on her belly. It was just amazing. And I say she because it's the female bee who does the work of collecting the pollen and the nectar, and the female bee who stings.
Oh, it is. Well, you know what? There's a lot of that makes a lot of sense.
So there you go.
That does explain quite a bit. Yeah. So was there anything in all this new information, though, that you have found most challenging? As we get started, what hurdles should we be ready to jump over?
Well, let me talk two things, I guess. If you're planning on starting a pollinator garden, I always thought, what a great idea to recommend people you're supposed to get like 5 or 6 of each plant so that the pollinators have, enough of that plant to get food from. And so I made up this big list of planting a pollinator garden tips. And one of them's, get 5 of this and 5 of that. And in reality, people start slow. It's okay. Try a few native plants in your garden, see how they go, see what grows for you, see how you like it. I know it's going to take you a little bit of time to get a garden going. Don't let that really deter you. The other thing is, these are perennials. They're slow growing. The old saying about perennials is the first year they sleep, the second year they creep, the third year they leap. So they may look almost dead that first year.
Yeah.
Just give them time, be patient, and let them in a spot where you can watch to see if they come up. They might not. Maybe you've got them in the wrong spot. Your soil's not right, whatever. So, start slowly with the garden, and I think you'll be well rewarded.
And just have fun with it. It's gardening.
Yes, because I've started by just I still own my mom's condo, even though she's passed away, and so I've got a lot of native plants I just stuck here and there to see how they'd grow. And I'm friends with Melinda Carmichael, who runs Beach Creek Botanical Gardens. And she came out, she just started laughing. She goes, I just love the way you just stick plants in. And I said, well, I'm trying to figure out what they look like and where they grow. And, that's my way of learning. And so, I would encourage people to do the same thing.
Are these things that we need to feed and water and watch the amount of sunshine and all of those things that we pay so much close attention to, the hard to grow things?
Your native plants tend to be a little bit more durable, I'll say, but you do want to plant them in the right place. If they require sunshine, you want to make sure they get 6 to 8 hours of sunshine a day at least. And as new plants, you still may have to water them if there's a drought period, but by and large, your native plants are much more drought tolerant, much more poor soil tolerant. And you need to watch which ones may be aggressive spreaders. Sometimes people jump into this. For instance, they want to grow milkweed for monarch butterflies, and I encourage that.
It's beautiful,
but there are several kinds of milkweed, and the common milkweed, which is the butterfly's favorite, unfortunately for us, is a fairly aggressive spreader. So you might want a little bigger space to plant it in. Or when you see it starting to spread, make sure you get that hoe and chop it off, and just be diligent about that so it doesn't get out of control, and then you end up being miserable and saying, I should have never done this.
Got a whole yard of milkweed.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect. Well, I'll tell you what, this has been really educational. Thank you so much, Judge Julie Edwards, for all you do in our community.
Thanks, Susie.